Okay, colleagues, I know there are a number of conversations taking place, but the session does need to get started. Welcome, everyone. Good morning to this first of the parallel sessions, Decolonisation and Africa's Independence. The following two sessions will essentially be collapsed. That is the decolonisation and Africa's independence, as well as teaching and teacher education. The way the session will run is that I will introduce our first panel of speakers to take the stage. They will have 45 minutes. To my understanding, it's going to be 30 minutes of a presentation. We'll then open it up to the floor for 15 minutes of dialogue. And then immediately thereafter, I will introduce the second panel, and we will follow a similar process. Thereafter is lunch. So if there's ever been any incentive for us to stick to time, that would be it. I would like to, in the meantime, introduce Lucky, Walter, and Heloise to please come and take the stage. They will be discussing colonization and Africa's independence in education, economy, and culture. Colleagues, if there's anything that we noted from yesterday's session, it's that the Faculty of Education has much to say. So you will not be hearing much from me. I'm going to hand over immediately to them. I believe Heloise will be kicking us off.
Yes, no, it is on. Good morning, colleagues. What a privilege, actually, to be sitting here with these two young colleagues of mine, reflecting on our practice. All three of us were part of the faculty presentation yesterday, and it was in this very space that the three of us decided that we would submit an abstract for this Indaba, because we thought it was going to be, or that it's important for us to reflect on our praxis. So I'm not going to do much. I think, I said to them, for me, it's about sharing as a faculty what are the things, the guiding principles, the characteristics that we strive towards when we talk about decolonizing our curriculum, decolonizing our our teaching and our learning. And the slide that I submitted for this presentation, it's only one slide because I want to share that, and I want to then reflect on how we applied these guiding principles to our school-based learning module. So you'll see, and this comes from Carolison and Duckett. It's an article that they wrote. I actually was at a presentation where Carolison spoke on decolonization, and she finds herself in the States at the moment, but is from Cape Town. And she says we have to strive to disrupt the privileged Euro-American Western epistemologies, because we were brought up with that. We were indoctrinized into thinking that the views of the West was the only and the best views to address anything. We have to reframe pathologized accounts of marginal people, how people were written out of stories, out of the curriculum. And we saw that if I think back of my own schooling, how I was, had to read books from an Afrikaans perspective, white Afrikaner perspective, reclaiming and reframing the erasure of histories, because some majority groups, their histories were just erased. It was not captured. Deconstructing colonial discourse, inserting counter narratives to what we were taught, foregrounding indigenous knowledges. And I referred to that yesterday, Dr. Simai, in your absence, how we are doing that in the faculty, where we are not sticking to the traditional way of teaching and the traditional way of just sticking to teaching in a classroom, but that we're venturing out to the communities, foregrounding politics. Now, we were also brought up to believe that politics is a bad thing. It is, associated with violence. It is associated with these party politics that we're seeing at the moment going on before the elections is going to happen on the 29th. But politics is actually having an opinion, standing up for that, for what is right. And so they also say that, we need to foreground politics of knowledge production. When we talk about that, who's involved in this knowledge production? Are we acknowledging everybody that's involved, and their positionalities, their race, their ethnicity, and their gender? We need to be activists. An activist that is central to what we do in our teaching and learning, inside and outside of the classroom. Then our pedagogical tools employed, or we need to employ pedagogical tools for critical reflexivity. The critical approach to everything that we do requires us to, when we have completed a project, that we take a step back and we ask the critical questions in terms of whose voices did we hear? Whose voices is absent and silent? And why is it absent and silent? And finally, drawing on ecologies of knowledge appropriate to the context. I spoke about the fact that for us, decolonial praxis also focus very much on not forefronting one dominant worldview. Instead, acknowledging that there are various views, various ways of doing things. So that is my little input in terms of theory regarding decolonialism. But if I have to now, because if you looked at our topic, it was about decolonializing beyond the theory, beyond the classroom. And so the example that I thought of sharing here this morning was what we experienced in our faculty in terms of teaching practice, which is a core of any teacher education curriculum. And so what we found was that, students are required to go out to do teaching practice. But what they did was, they chose to go back to the same context where they came from. So in other words, if I matriculated at a predominantly white school, I would go back to that same context and do my teaching practice there. And they never got exposed to, the different contexts. The different contexts, there's a whole lot of disruptions going on, but we're carrying on. I think people are still trying to find their venues, and we just started. There's more people coming. And this was not confined to one race, colleagues. We found the very same thing happening with our Black and our colored students, that they would go back to the same context where they came from. And this was worrying, because it spilled over to post-graduation, where students would graduate and would not find a teaching post in their context, and they would be prepared to work as a waiter in a restaurant instead of going to a context where they were needed. And we needed to do something about that in our faculty. So then we introduced in this teaching practice module a requirement that students over their 4 years needed to do teaching practice in different contexts. Rural contexts, what we would call a township context, what we would call predominantly colored contexts, and then your suburb or your ex-model C schools. And there was a whole lot of resistance from the students, a whole lot of resistance. I wrote down the things, and my colleague, Prof. Geduld, is here. She can tell you some of what we did was we met with the students and we did a little bit of research. We had them complete a questionnaire and we had them discuss this in a focus group. And some of the responses were from our Black students. I don't want to go to a colored school. I'm going to feel unsafe there because they're gangsters. Prof, I don't want to go to a white school. I've never spoken to white people. The only white person that I ever spoke to was the woman that my mother worked for. You had the same thing from the white students and the colored students who did not want to go into former Model C schools. And we had to do something about that. So what we did was, in addition to saying that over the period of the 4-year degree, you have to visit or do your teaching practice in different contexts, and we'll monitor that. We also had them buddy up with each other to actually invite them into each other's spaces, to make them comfortable, and to make them realize that, despite all these views that we have, there are opportunities there for us to learn. And it's been very successful. After the students, did the exchanges, we reflected with them again. And the reviews were positive. I didn't expect to learn as much, in that context as I did. And that is an example of what we did in our faculty in terms of decolonizing our practice and what we teach in a particular module. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Donubia Walters to continue.
All right, thank you, colleagues. Can I have my slide, please? At least for the audience, yes. I'll be looking from my laptop. So to add on to that conversation in the whole decolonization discourse, I'm speaking from the curriculum and postgraduate perspective, where I was teaching the honor students about decolonization of the curriculum. And just like the dean said, most of our students, we prepare them after matric to go and teach. We give them an experience where they believe what they're learning. They go there and they teach it because there's a kind of reward and punishment thing. If you don't pass, you fail and you'll not be a teacher. And then they graduate and then they come for honors and you have to tell them to decolonize all what they are teaching. And I started this lecture by telling the students that, don't you think you're being monitored in class? And the students were, why? And I said, okay, is there any degree that you have 4-year experience at the university and yet somebody is coming to inspect what you're doing in classroom? Do you know anyone? And they said, no. I said, fine. Even a medical doctor, there's nobody who will come there and check and all of this. They just write a report of their activities for noting. You have, there are strict administrative things. So if you look at what happened, one of the failures of OBE was that there was so much time allocated for documents and completing of forms. So it affected teaching time. Then I said, you have the subject advisor, you have a very strict curriculum. So what do you think they are hiding? Why are you being monitored even if you're not in class? They're like, okay, no, it's just the nature of the job. So it's like, no, there's a lot about empowerment. There's a lot about enlightening people's thinking. So the curriculum is deliberately designed in such a way that you will stay where you are and you don't create disruption. Whose disruption are we referring to? So from that, can we go to the next? Yeah, I'll keep on asking you to go to the next one. So I came up with this one and I said, I think Prof. Pili actually saw this one as well. She thought it was a published article, but it was a question. So I asked the student that, let's have this conversation and I'll surely bring it to you at the end of the module to write an exam. And was recently, much has been written and talked about decolonization in South Africa with different and often fragmented pathways on how the process of decolonization can be enacted and implemented in the curriculum. Because we don't have, if you were part of the presentation yesterday from the faculty, I think the dean started and also the deputy dean explained the faculty position. But while we separated our discourse or our conversation, we realized that there are so many ways and so many views about that same one. So I said, some universities have introduced modules that acknowledge African indigenous knowledge, while some are focused on indigenous languages. All of this approach seems to be superficial and expose our ignorance on how sophisticated the colonial project was and is still going. In addition, our intellectual response to decolonization does not have a reliable theoretical or philosophical base on which the decolonial project of the curriculum can be understood and implemented at schools. So, simply put, the approach to decolonize the curriculum can unintentionally lead to recolonization. So, having said that, I had to go back to where Western education started. And I looked at Pluto's allegory of the cave. And I explained to them, you won't see this very much in literature because it underpins a lot of things that we do. So if you look at, there are some group of people that they put us just down. And I explained to them that it represents the society and the school. And this was around 3000 BC. BC means, if I'm right, before the birth of Christ. So we are 2000 years after that. And if you notice, the sun there seems to be a fireplace where the shadow now casts on the wall. And the people behind it, they decide whatever you do and they have amusement. So they construct a particular society. So I explained somebody goes out and see the real world out there. And then by coming back, the person now gets killed because they want to enlighten the rest of the society. And I ask, we start identifying the various components into the society, the media and all whatnot. And I deliberately left the person that went out and came back. And I asked them, who do you think that person is? And none of them knew. And I told them that you are the person, you are the teacher. So in order for us to decolonize our curriculum, this is what we have to do. I won't go to this slide because of time, but it illustrates exactly what the allegory of the cave talks about. And then I have to say, but what are the implementations of that on our society and how do we decolonize it? So the first thing is that I look at the access criteria we have, particularly at the honors level. Your language must be good. Whose language is it? So we make an artificial association between language competency and knowledge production. The next thing is that our teaching and learning in itself, it's underpins certain practices that does not bear any relevance to, like what the dean just said about the community that they come from. And to some extent, you don't blame them because they see an artificial value in a particular society over the other one. And then our quality assurance, the whole quality assurance privileges Western epistemology. Because if you submit an article talking about Africa, I don't think, if you're radical, I don't think they will even look at it. Especially when you want accredited journal or prestigious ones. You won't even see the light of day. Our assessment practice is also much the same, and also issues of relevance. Because of time, I don't want to get into it because it may just be another lecture. So I just want to end up, the next slide, please. The next one. Okay, it looks like I'm faster than what you have. Are you going up or down? Okay, the next one. Yeah. So in summary, if we don't decolonize and sit on the table, will always be the menu. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Walters. Thank you, Prof. And thank you, Chair. And greetings to everyone. So I think I will take a slightly different approach. But of course, I want to actually go down to TVET, in terms of how we can actually transform TVET. And I will try my best not to use words such as decolonize, because I think decolonization is bigger. It's so big that sometimes when you say you are decolonizing, you might feel that you are failing if you don't actually see decolonized results, because it's not like it will happen like tomorrow or anything like that. So, however, the little things that we do on a daily basis, I believe that they actually help transform the sector, and in a way actually help to, maybe we'll get to a point where we can say it is somewhat decolonized. But now I want to start from Africans, for some reason, and of course, I'm a fan of Chiga Onyene, the capitalist nigger. There's something he said about Africans, and it leads to saying that Africans are very polite generally, to a point where he feels that Africans are actually the only group of people who are actually exploited by other groups in the world. And when we actually look around, we can actually see that Black people are generally exploited. You talk slavery, you talk even the kind of oppression that we have in the form of racism. You actually realize that Black people everywhere seem to be victims of all these things. But the question is why? I find Africans to be polite, of course. And then now I have got this headline here. Oh, so you have my rings there. Oh, okay. So it says that the UK is sending back Ghana's looted treasures on loan. And it was very interesting when I read this thing. Is this thing even working anymore? Oh, my voice, ne? I know. I don't need the mic, but for the people online, of course. So now, and I was like, okay, how does the UK steal something from Ghana and then they borrow it to Ghana, and Ghana celebrates that? That's me. But of course, now the legal people will tell you that no, during that time, the international law allowed people to actually take spoils when they defeat you in war. But now another question would be like, was Ghana at that time part of that international law kind of a thing? Did they sit down and agree that this is what we actually agree on, that when we go to battle, this is what actually happens, right? So there are those things. And I find African responses to be very, very polite and not so progressive when it comes to international affairs. That for me is a problem. And even when we talk about decolonization, there are certain things that we are not able to do because we don't act as P.L. Lumumba would say. We do not act as diners at the table, but we are actually the food that is being eaten at the table. And that is what Africa has been. So until Africa actually becomes a diner, an equal partner, I think we are actually not going very far. Can we go to the next slide, which shows P.L. Lumumba himself? He's the most outspoken person about African politics. And what he shows is that colonization is actually alive and well. So we think that we are out colonization, but we're actually going there again. And then now, there is one thing that I'm interested in. Can we go to the next slide? You have got Steve Biko there, and then you have got Mzwakhe Mbuli on the other side. You know that Mzwakhe Mbuli is actually referred to as the voice of reason. So, the interesting thing about Biko is that he actually said that at some point, we need to take ourselves seriously, to a point where when we deal with the international politics, we have to actually deal with it from an equal perspective. What that means is that when you welcome people, the settlers in particular, you welcome them in their own terms. And why do I raise that? Can we go to the next slide? For Biko, we should not be worrying about racism today in South Africa. We have got institutions that are so racist, and it is public knowledge. And all we do is write articles and publish articles about racism, and we call ourselves intellectuals. And then all we do is to write petitions, but we're actually not dealing with racism. So we cannot say that we have a government, but at the same time, you're actually worried about a smaller thing like racism in this. Can we go to the other slide? The next one. So here, the question is, so what do we do? And I've just put pictures of people, you see? And I said, basically, these are some of the people who represent critical thought. And these people have been our starting point in terms of teaching. So we actually teach from Paulo Freire, for example. You see Julius Nyerere there, W.E. Du Bois there, you've got Nomalanga Mkhize there, and you've got Karabo Mayane there, Neville Alexander, Ali Mazrui, Jonathan Johnson, Bell Hooks. Those are actually some, and Catherine Odora Hopper's my favorite, of course. Those are some of the people that actually guide us in terms of where do we start. But now in TVET, if you go to the last slide, because TVET is actually a sector that has been founded on racism and racial inequalities. And it continues even today to a point where people actually run away from TVET because they still have that perception. So we have been trying, and we are doing our best to actually make sure that we transform that sector. One of the things that we do, we actually challenge the stereotypes about that. We write about it, we teach about it, we put that in our curriculum. Also, we challenge the stereotype that TVET colleges are actually for students who cannot pass at school, because that's actually the dominant one. And we've got a careership project where we give career guidance to make sure that people actually do take TVET seriously. But at the same time, we improve the image of TVET, because that also needs to improve as well. And then we also now even challenge that TVET lecturers, and this actually is the last one, are good, just good for purpose, in a sense that they were not really studying at the time. No one even saw the need for them to study further. As long as they can teach, that was it. But now we actually make sure that we actually invite them in their numbers to come and study all the way to PhD, because the quality of an education system cannot exceed the quality of its teachers. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our panelists for a very varied but thought-provoking presentation. We have just under 15 minutes for questions, comments, and I'd like to open that up to the floor now. I'll start off by noting 2 or 3 hands. We'll give the panelists some time to respond, and then if there are any questions after that, we will continue. I've noted 1 hand, 2 hands. Okay, we'll start with these 3 hands. Thank you.
Okay. Good day, colleagues. My questions I'll be directly. I'm going to start with my colleague, Dr. Walters, and the next one I'll go to Dr. Lucky. I almost said Comrade Lucky because of what he was presenting. There were a bit of politics. So, Dr. Walters, I think I have an interest. Perhaps it's a question which I have my own understanding and also intending to learn, because I've realized that what you wrote, you are not necessarily quoting anyone, is the thought that you had, okay, on the issue of when you put it as a statement. I think you are not imagining it. You are just saying, my observation is that the approach that is used towards decolonization can lead to recolonization, right? And then the basis was on theoretical and a philosophical approach, which my take is, when we decolonize, are we really intending to replace the approaches or theories that have been there, or are we intending to take them and contextualize them within our existing realities? So perhaps if you can expand on that, so that you must not think perhaps we need to develop a new framework or mechanism, because education remain education and remain the citizens of the world. We cannot. So with Lucky, I just want to clarify on this issue of us finding public management in the universities and finding public management in the TVETs. At some point, I feel like now the TVETs want to contest the knowledge that is in the university. Yet when we grow up, we thought the TVET brings skill, and unfortunately, they put it as if those who cannot pass in high school are suitable for the TVET. Yet now I start to realize that I think I might have done well if I was a carpenter, even after passing matric, because there is money there. But although intention is not to make money, it's to provide services to people. Thank you very much.
Hello. No, my question is, I see here that the topic is decolonization and Africa's independence, right? And as teachers, I'm sure you would know that much of the, for example, history that we are taught is, they say, okay, how can I put this? It's more Greek, like, you understand? So my question is, what are you teachers doing to bring light to the fact that in fact, there was like history before Greek here in Africa, for example, like ancient Egypt, you know, and the sciences that are referred to, like were initiated by Greeks, were initiated here in Africa, you know, in ancient African kingdoms and stuff. So my question is, what are you teachers doing to bring light to that information?
I just want to pick up on what was said about the race and how your students felt uncomfortable going to schools they're not, you know, haven't been exposed to. And I'm wondering how during your lecture or, you know, just in the engagement with the students, did you explore their own perceptions of their own race, other races, and how that shows up in the classroom? And then especially how that shows up systemically in why those schools are in the conditions they are in, the teaching environment is in the way it is, and perhaps that being one of the motivating factors why they don't want to be in those schools. You know, so how do you have those engagements with them, and then what meaning making came from that?
Thank you. I'm not entirely sure who would like to go first in responding to some of these questions, but pending on the length of your answers, we may or may not have time for a second round. Okay. Perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. I think it's my fear, there's currently recolonization. I won't get into that because it may give another round. But if you want to understand decolonization, you need to understand the structure under which it is organized and the way it is being manifested. And I'll give you an example. If you want to understand the way it is being manifested or structured, the feast must fall movement, they talked about an apple falling down from tree, which may seem a bit naive to use that as an example. But what happened there was that, what are we decolonizing? And I'm happy to use the word contextualization as well. To some extent, colonialism have survived for more than a century. There must be something they are doing right. And there must be something that we need to understand from that perspective so that we change that right to wrong. And if you use it, we tend to use it as a blanket word for everything. But the very nature under which knowledge is structured If you take a flight from here to Europe, decolonization doesn't matter, it's gravity and aerodynamics. Do you decolonize that? So what we seem to need to understand is what knowledge are we contextualizing and what knowledge are we decolonizing? And because we have failed as a society to distinguish what we are doing, the colonizers feed on that ignorance and just allow you to talk about it because you don't understand the parameters under which they exist. And so for me, that is the next level. And going back to you, I'm presume most people here are teachers, so I won't speak for everyone, but I think everybody has their view about it. Education, as teachers, we are quite doing a lot from where I stand, but it's a balancing act. You don't also want to radicalize people and at the same time you educate them. So as a faculty, we take a position of awareness and to understand the powers that inform the colonial forces that exist. I'll end there.
Okay, thank you for the question. And I think the question is mostly on, the government strategy in terms of what programs, those PQMs, program quality mix, what programs do we have for universities? What programs do we have for universities, colleges? The thing with the colleges is that we used to have vocational colleges separately in the past, and we used to have technical colleges separately in the past, and now they were brought together. But the nature of programs remain the same. And I think the idea is based on the NQF. And this is how even the HRDC argues it, that the focus of South Africa defines skill is that you have got low skill, you have got mid-level skills, and you have got high skills, right? So you have got three types of skills. So colleges, by their very nature, from their colonial roots, of course, actually cater mostly for low skills. That is why even when they advertise a learnership and an internship, if you come with a college qualification, you get paid less either way. So it is organized in that sense. Even the requirements, the requirements in terms of your metric requirements, they are actually generally lower for the TVET college. So the colleges are actually categorized as that. And then now the policy came up with the issue of doing away with the dead ends, that you can do that qualification at a lower level, but it does not mean it's the end of the world. It means once you have your college diploma, you can actually go to university, and I know they will make you do another diploma, kind of a thing, because you are considered low-skilled kind of a person. So I think when you actually look at it in terms of how people are categorized, even when you look at a metric certificate or metric statement of results, that says that you qualify to do a higher certificate, you qualify to do already people, when they get 7 A's, they don't even think about college because they've got 7 A's and they can do a degree. It's now those of us who actually get, oh, you qualify to do a diploma or a certificate. I mean, we can't even go to university because they want you to actually qualify to be endorsed to do that. So I think the structure is still there. And I think Boju will actually say that there are things of logic and there's a logic of things. So you can actually see that this is the logic of things currently, but not necessarily things of logic. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to respond to the last two questions. With the second question being, what is it that we teach our student teachers in terms of decolonializing content and the curriculum? And I think as teacher educators, we are very aware of the fact that the process of decolonization has not really reached our schools yet. That is why you still see, the division in the schools in terms of race and in terms of how those schools are resourced. because that is also, there's a clear division in terms of that. I think Walter's alluded to the fact that for us it's about, because we can write it up in papers, we can go and do presentations at conferences, we can make recommendations to government, but the actual change is going to come when we change the mindset of our student teachers and future teachers going into those schools. And I think that is why it was so important for us to counter the assumptions that they have about the different contexts, and to make them realize that they are actually needed in those contexts where they don't want to go to bring about the change. So for us, it's all about awareness. And I just want to slightly touch on the fact that we mentioned it yesterday, that our curriculum and our teaching and learning in the faculty is underpinned by a humanizing pedagogy that is very, is a stream of critical pedagogy. And a lot of people will not agree with what critical pedagogy, advocates for. But the one thing that we believe is we need to encourage our students to think critically about things. It is about questioning the status quo. Where you are is what's happening here. Is that acceptable for everyone? Do we need to bring about change here? And to act on that, not to sit back, but to act on that. To come to the third question and the last question, you asked, what is it that we do to let students interrogate their own identity, the race issue, and we closely linked to this teaching practice module that I spoke about is our education theory modules. And they've been organized in such a way, where in the second year, it focuses on them bridging from school into teacher education. And in the second year, we focus on them becoming a teacher, and we focus on teacher identity, what it means to be a teacher. And for we wanting them to sort of engage in that critical thinking, position themselves in that context, and ask themselves, make themselves vulnerable. Not to say that, I go in here and I know everything, but rather to learn from the context and to learn how you can use the resources in the context to create this ideal educational setting that you strive for. I want to come back to the example about, where I said white students asked or said, I don't want to go to a black school because there's no rugby fields. So we said, when we engaged with them, if you're wanting a rugby field, what is it that you can do to create the rugby field there? There's a soccer field there. How can you use that? It's about thinking how you can use the resources. It's about thinking critically to bring about the change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. It's terrible being this person, particularly when the conversations begin livening up. But I do encourage us, lunch is around the corner. Please note the faces. I believe the best conversations happen around food. So please do continue these conversations outside of this room. I'd like us to thank again our panelists for a really enriching conversation. And then, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our second panel to please come and take their seats as well. We will start with Deirdre Noluva, who will present on decolonizing student-teacher community engagement through community action projects, a humanizing approach. They will present for 15 minutes. This will be followed by Logan on decolonizing our teaching through drama and theatre in education as pedagogy. We will then open up, as has been the case with this previous session, we'll then open up to the floor for questions. Okay, I'm just going to give us a moment just to change presentations, and then I will hand over to our speakers. Deirdre, will you begin? Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Nolu Vohangana, and this afternoon we will be talking to you about decolonizing student-teacher community engagement through community action projects, a humanizing approach. And so the majority of educational curricula at universities in Africa, they are still dominated by externally imposed paradigms. And because of this paradigm, it perpetuates injustice by overshadowing and disregarding our African indigenous nodes of knowing and of doing. And this in turn, can we have the next slide, please? Can we have the next slide? Thank you. And so this in turn then proves to be profoundly dehumanizing. And so we understand dehumanization as a process of dismantling structures, norms, and perceptions that have been perpetrated by colonial practices and still continue to persist today. And so the significance in this process of dismantling is actually noted by Tak and Yang, who caution against the interpreting of decolonization as a metaphor. However, we concur with Paulo Freire, who actually advocates for educators to actually use colonization as a metaphor for oppression. And he also strongly believes that higher education can serve as a tool for actually fostering a more equitable society where our students are actively engaging in these endeavors. And so theoretical understanding, it must be translated into practical application. And our students are doing that through the community action project. So by decolonizing our curriculum and actually aligning it to societal needs, our students, they are provided an opportunity to actually be in service of society. And so colleagues, embracing decoloniality, it warrants for a radical shift in how we and also our students approach community engagement. And we are doing this with our student teachers through community action projects. And so through the assistance of the hubs of convergence, and I'm very happy to see the senior manager of the hubs of convergence with us today, and also the director of the engagement office, through their assistance, our students are actually able to be in service of society by coming up with community action projects. And so these projects are actually separated in 3 components. Our students are prompted to co-construct a proposal of a project that they want to do with community that they think will make a meaningful impact in the societies in which they find themselves in. And so our student teachers, they first go into these communities and engage with the various stakeholders that are going to be impacted by these projects. After that engagement, they then together come with, they identify a challenge that the community is either facing, whether it is a school or the community, but they together collaboratively engage and come up with a challenge. And so our students then have to write a proposal that details what this challenge that they are going to be addressing is, what it is that they're going to be doing, and they are acknowledging their stakeholders in this proposal. They need to take stock of what is it that is in their disposal. So what resources do they have? What is it that they do not have? And how do they plan on getting those resources that they do not have? And they need to reach this collaboratively with the stakeholders that they are working together with. And after this proposal is then done, they then go into the implementation phase. Now, this is where now they're actually doing the project. What is very important in this phase is that they need to demonstrate to us that they did not go into that community and impose what they think the community needs, but rather they gathered insights from the stakeholders, and the solution that has been brought about is shaped by the voices of those various stakeholders. And so they need to be able to demonstrate this in this portfolio of evidence. They need to be able to bring out the voices that came together and decided on the solution, and also how they went about implementing the project. And so the second phase is a portfolio of evidence that after the project has been implemented, that the students then put together collaboratively with their stakeholders. Can I have the next slide, please? And so this is just an example of some of the projects that our student teachers embarked on. As you can see, there are various projects. Some looked into healthcare awareness. Some looked into breaking period poverty. Some addressed issues of poverty. And also there were reading clubs and there were mentorships. There's a Feed a Child project that they did. And that project actually came about because they noticed that the learners at the school, some of them come hungry. However, they did not make a decision to actually bring food to the school, but then they consulted the stakeholders, the parents of those learners, the school, the teachers, the learners, how can we be of assistance? And this issue actually came up that our learners, some of them, they come to school and they are hungry. And collaboratively with the community, they came up with that project. And so again, what we stress with this project, and I think that's where decolonization comes, you do not take a decision for the stakeholders. However, everyone comes and sit at the table. They're not the menu, but they actually sit at the table and they collaboratively reach the decision that this is the challenge that we are facing. And they themselves come with the solution as to, we think this is how we can address this challenge. And so our students, they have to demonstrate these through these portfolios of evidence of these community action projects. And then the last, no, it's fine, we can keep it here. The last component now of this project is where then they have to write reflective essays. So they did the proposal, they told us how they are going to be working with the communities for these projects, and then they implemented the project. And then now, this is an individual task now, whereby each student reflects on the experience of being part of this community action project. And this is what Professor Gedald will be carrying on as to, so that we can see the impact that this project has had on these student teachers and what are we finding from their experiences from these projects. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Didi Gedald. This PSBL 400 module, it's a school-based learning module. The beauty of it is that it has been designed from a transdisciplinary approach. So there are various disciplines in the institutions that we make use of or assist us. And I think also in that, it breaks away from the siloic approach in terms of building our modules in silos. We have engaged with the director from the engagement office, Dr. Bruce. Ms. Oyama is here who co-construct this module with us. We have Professor Fiona Goliath from Social Development, Social Working and Psychology Department. And we have a number of others that we approach in assisting us. And this is also part, I think, of how we go about decolonizing our thinking that knowledge in a specific field should be linear. All right. So one of the findings of our projects that we looked at was the impact of going beyond the classroom. Students highlighted how much they appreciate different persons coming into our live session and participate. Not only myself and Noluvo and Natalie, but others outside of the education faculties, and this broadened their understanding in terms of the projects that they participated in. One project specifically focused on breaking period poverty, and students mentioned that this allowed them to dig deeply into their being. It penetrates their innermost thoughts and their feelings as student teachers. They became more sensitive in terms of how many young girls come to school without having anything to protect them. when they are going through the menstrual cycle. And this for us was really an eye-opener in terms of how many boxes of menstrual sanitary pads they collected and distributed among schools. Then, in terms of shifting of their mindsets, a group of students went to Humansdorp, where they stay in a community, and they started a vegetable garden in the school. For them, this was a beautiful space because now they have elders from their community that could share with them on what a garden is. And many would say a garden is a sacred space. It's a space that gives to us. And this shifted their minds from being food consumers to being food citizens. And especially as mentioned by Noluvo earlier, it's not about bringing the stuff. It's about producing it so that all of us can benefit from it. And then also treasuring the memories of what our grandparents would share with us. In terms of my grandmother maintained a garden, which I adored, one student said, and this garden fed 8 children as a single parent, right? So as our understanding involved our perceptions and our identity, as well as our sense of being transformed, students recognize. So they were very humbled by these experiences. Students also mentioned that their values and principles shifted. They would use storytelling in clubs, and one specific project I can remember is of students being at Erica Home of Safety, where they started a reading club, and they use puppets to demonstrate to the young ones what they are being reading about in the storybooks. And the puppet is a indigenous knowledge system whereby stories is used to educate. And this is a well-known method for many of us, whereby stories are being told from one generation to the next, and students and learners could identify with this. And as a group of students, they felt that, as Shava is saying, it's these thoughts that epistemologically broaden our horizons about the value of indigenous knowledges. So puppetry, colleagues, and I found this to be used not only in language and in storytelling and in literacy, but also in the natural sciences. They use puppetry and stories to decolonize the content as proposed by a Western ideological approach. In the social science, also in the history, they make use of puppets. So it's not just limited to literacy and oral history and so forth. So it can be used across the curriculum, especially as we find it in schools. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you very much for those presentations. I now invite Logan, who's going to lead us in the next presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be presenting a talk on how to decolonize your teaching through the means of drama and theatre in education. And I'm going to give you an overview of some of the strategies that I've been using in my class. And then I'm also going to be zooming in on a case study with a group of Kenyan students. I have been teaching in Kenya and Uganda, and they've also been coming to NMU. And I want to share with you a little project that I embarked on with them with regard to drama and theatre in education. Next slide, please. So many of you may be wondering, what is drama and theatre in education, and can you actually use it in your classes and the university space? Because we're so colonized in terms of the methodologies that we use. It's the students sitting and the lecturer lecturing, and do the students actually participate? But I want to tell you that I have experimented with drama and theatre in education over a very, very long period. This is my 36th year of teaching. and I started teaching in primary school, secondary school, and I used it there. And I realized the power of drama and theater in education from that time, from the time I was teaching in a school into university, and I implemented it in university as well. So drama in education is not a performance. It doesn't need to be a performance for an audience. It can happen in a class. So when we use drama in education, we give students or learners an opportunity to create scenes around particular issues affecting society at large. So those scenes could be scenes relating to patriarchy. It could be relating to gender-based violence. Anything, the sky is actually the limit. So what we do is we give the students an opportunity to create these scenes. They talk about what they want to create. So what they normally do is, if it's a specific theme that we're focusing on, then we get the students to work in groups and they create a frozen scene. We start off with tableau or frozen scene. And I want to situate my drama and theatre in education within the context of the theoretical framework. Where is it coming from? And it actually comes, it's called Theatre of the Oppressed. And Augusto Boal was one of the proponents of the Theatre of the Oppressed. And surprisingly enough, he worked with Paulo Freire. And so he was actually, you know, they worked together and he took the pedagogy of the oppressed further in terms of creating the Theatre of the Oppressed. And there are various components of the Theatre of the Oppressed that I'm going to share with you. So what is very important in terms of the drama and the theatre work is to reflect on the experiences. So whatever scene is being presented at the end of the day, the students must reflect on that and think of what solutions could they propose. Here is a critical issue. So what solutions do we propose? Next slide, please. So if you're thinking about the implementation of drama and theatre in education in your classes, some of the ways in which it could be done is via improvisation, role play, and I'm going to talk about image theatre, Augusto Boal's image theatre, and then theatre in education presentations. I've done all of these. And I've even used, recently, I've used dance, drama, and theatre in a workshop. We wanted to focus on issues of peace. So we use poetry, drama, and theatre, and just to conscientize participants on the importance of peace in society. Next slide, please. So Augusto Boal, two important concepts relating to Augusto Boal's work. The one focuses on, let me just first say that Augusto Boal went against the normal tradition of theatre work. Now, the normal tradition of theatre work is where the audience sits and the actors perform. So he was in line with Marxist thinking because that aligns to the Brechtian approach to theatre, where Brecht said that the audience must become part of the performance. Okay, and the audience must become part of the performance, and they must not be alienated from the actual performance. So he spoke about in forum theatre, what they did was they had a piece of theatre, they wrote a short script, they presented it, and then there was a critical issue that was presented, and then afterwards, members of the audience could come in and say, no, we changed that. We don't like what you did there because this is not a true reflection of what's happening in this community. Next slide, please. So forum theatre, that is called forum theatre. So you have a joker and the joker coordinates the activities. And so image theatre is where you create the frozen scenes. Okay, so it's a tableau, you create tableaus, you create these frozen scenes on issues of concern. So as you can see, decolonized work, gender issues, gender-based violence, oppression, all of these could be reflected. Next slide, please. So in image theater, we're using the body. You know, we are saying, how often do we use our body? So that is part of embodied kinesthetic learning. So when we use the body, we remember and we focus on our internal expressions, our emotions, all of that. That is part of African tradition and culture. And that is part of the African theatrical performance where the audience is part of the performance. And the Western theater wanted to destroy that, as we heard, and to eliminate that from the African theater traditions. Next slide, please. So some of the proponents of the theater in education, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, he also used it. He wanted to conscientize groups of people in rural areas to how they're being oppressed by capitalism. These were workers in a factory. And he was incarcerated by Moi, thrown into prison for 5 years because of his philosophy. Moi saw him as a threat because Moi was a capitalist. The next one, next slide. So now I want to just give you some examples of how I implemented, because of time constraints, I'm rushing a bit now. So I asked the group of Kenyan students to tell me, to discuss issues of diversity within Kenyan higher education institutions. I wanted them to create frozen scenes. These are some of the issues that they identified as problematic within the institutions. The next one. So in this scene, you see the lecturer is interested in one of the students, but not the other. You can see how he's used his body. So they're trying to show you how in their institutions, you find that lecturers are sometimes interested in female students. So that, and the students don't really react to say anything because it's, they feel they're going to be threatened. You know, their lecturers going to disadvantage them. The next one. In this one, religious intolerance. In that, they say that in their society, there are Muslims and Christians, and sometimes the Christians marginalize Muslims, as in this particular one, they were trying to demonstrate that. The next one. In this one, patriarchy and gender, where women are commodified. Women are seen as commodities. So you can see how the guys are now like standing there and like fiddling, you know, how they normally try to commodify women in this particular hustle. Okay, the next one. And that one there is exclusion based on ethnicity. In Kenyan society, there are many ethnic groups. And so what they find happening within the university setup is that certain ethnic groups see themselves as being superior to other ethnic groups. Like, for example, in certain parts of Kenya, if you go to Moi University, there's a certain ethnic group that controls. And so they don't treat the Kikuyus the same because the Kikuyus control Nairobi. So there's that tension between the different groups. The next one. In this one, they wanted to show how within the institutions, within the classroom setup, you have exclusion based on academic ability. So they look down upon certain students who they see as being dull, who they see as being not academically gifted. So you find that happening across, you know, in our institutions. So when we also look at improvisation, we don't actually need to have prepare a script. That happens spontaneously. And one of my colleagues is going to participate in a skit later. We're going to enjoy that. So the teacher can also participate with the students. So you don't have a script. It just happens spontaneously. The next slide, please. And what we did, I discovered this poem, I Am Diversity, online. It's a beautiful poem. It has all the aspects of diversity. And we gave each group of a stanza, and they had to enact the stanza, and then we did a group presentation, but we had a protagonist and the antagonist. So I acted as the protagonist, and another student said she will be the antagonist because her role was to completely dismantle all aspects of diversity. So that was her role. So there was a tussle between the good and the bad within that particular scene. Next slide, please. So this was a group improvisation, and you had the negative force coming up and saying, down with religious tolerance. We must not have religious tolerance. And then you see each of the groups now are completely annihilated. So there's a tussle between me as trying to revive all of them and the antagonist who has destroyed the pillars that hold the nation together. Okay, and then next slide. You can see it very and so we come together to say that we will overcome all of these. And so drama and theatre in education, as you can see, using the body to demonstrate the power of how issues are presented within society at large, and the power of the body to convey meaning at the end of the day. And when we all participate together, we get energy from each other. And this energy builds us into a community. And that is the power of drama and theatre. Next one. And there was just another one. I still have time, okay. You can see we have a lot of fun. There may be another slide. Okay, this one here. This was a class performance from my third year education group. What I wanted them to do was, I wanted them to look at issues relating to challenges that marginalized groups have. And the one group, they actually came up with an interesting story. This was based on a true account of a student from the northern areas who was marginalized. And he grew up in a home where his parents were alcoholics, and how he told himself that I'm going to become an influencer. I'm going to transform society. I'm going to become a motivational speaker. And what this group did, they did something so amazing. They actually examined all the issues that affected him and how eventually he rises. And they used the poem by Maya Angelou, Still I Rise. Still I Rise. And they took all the verses of Still I Rise and they created the scenes to create the story. And I had an older guy in my class who was like in his late 30s. And then you had the younger ones. He came now, so many years later, 4 years later, to stand at the podium, address the assembly, because now he has become a teacher to touch the lives of everyone else. So that, ladies and gentlemen, you can see I'm very active and I enjoy that. That is my story. And I hope that you take away something that will be beneficial to you in your own teaching experience. Of course, you can see drama and theatre in education. You can apply it across your range of subjects. And what I will say is, as you can see, it takes some time. So you won't be able to do it during every class or every lecture, but you can decide a critical moment. I normally think of a critical moment, like if I'm doing critical pedagogy, then for 2 lectures, then we do a critical moment. So thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Logan, for that animating and lively presentation. I think it gives us a lot to speak about, a lot to think about in our own teaching practice. I am going to open up the floor for some questions now. I do want to note that one of our speakers, please, thank you, one of our speakers, Noluvo, has extended her apologies. She's had to dart off to take a class. These are the realities of what we juggle as educators. So yes, I would like to open up. I note one hand. I will start with 3 if we do, and then allow the speakers to respond. I note the second hand. Okay, for the sake of time, I'll note these 2 hands to start, and then we will give our panelists an opportunity to respond. And should there be any burning questions after that, we do have time to take another round. Okay.
So given that people don't want to ask questions, allow me to give the background. So in my view, and of course I may be completely wrong altogether, things like slavery, like colonization, are also facilitated by the same people who are actually colonized or taken to slavery, in a sense that they do participate. Your brother selling you to slavery. Now we even have our own people selling our children for human trafficking. So these are the things that we as a society, because I'm not going to argue that we are like what is this thing? Like we are like one, we are in unity or anything like that. But you do find that some of the things, we do have situations that we ourselves are complicit. But now the emergence of critical thought, all the way from Marx, all the way to Freire, and interesting, I did not know that in drama we have the theater of the oppressed, of course. It does seem to a certain extent to be a critique of the colonial state of things, or the capitalist state of things, which of course capitalism was actually an instrument of colonization, because it was actually business enterprises that were actually going around in adventure trying to find resources and labor. Fine. But today we are in a neoliberal university or a capitalist university, as far as we actually debate. And to a certain extent, we are beneficiaries of capitalism. And to a certain extent, we are actually feeding to the life of capitalism to a certain extent, because we do participate. Whether we say we like it or not, and we are critical of it, but we are in a way participating in this capitalism. And now my question is that when we critique capitalism, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to decolonize capitalism? Are we trying to do away with it, given that it feeds us? But now, of course, that can be wrong as well. One last question, that's for you, Logan. And then for you, Didi, it's just a question of, I did get, but what I saw, I also saw some elements of charity in your presentation, but of course, maybe it was not, but I could see some form of charity. And I just want to ask that, where do you draw the line between charity and empowerment, when you do this project? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Lucky. I'm going to hand over to Bruce.
I'll try not to deliver manifesto like Lucky. And just give some, and I think the question is latter question, I think in my opinion, relates to the tension we have in doing this work. And so what we find on the continuum of ideologies, I would argue, are people that would either sit and constantly critique, whether left or right, and do absolutely nothing, or those that will engage in the discourses. And I think I am so mindful and critical of either side of that continuum that would constantly just want to interrogate, not in a deep reflective, but in a more responsive way. My question would be to both colleagues then, in reflection of the presentation. I think, Logan, when I first participated in one of your frozen tontons, it was everything you described, that it evoked so much in the self. And what we're finding in trying to encourage people to do engagement, teaching and learning in a way that's inclusive is that people are shy, they doubt their own element of asset that they have given their location. What's the possibility of this critical participatory approach merging with some of your methods to then actually use it then as teaching moments, a methodological teaching moments as well, so that also forms another avenue of collaboration, because I think it's about expression as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Bruce. I've noted one additional hand. I will take this question and then I will give the panel an opportunity to respond.
My question is for the gentleman. I was wondering, with the way that you are using people's bodies and expecting people to use their bodies as part of the learning and the teaching, and I think reflecting and understanding, what accommodations do you make for people understanding also things that have been done to their bodies, pain and trauma that sits within the body, and how that might show up in the class? Because I think as marginalized people who have been oppressed, much has been done to our bodies. Very often we do not own our bodies. And I wonder, in this method, what vulnerabilities comes forward? What are you exposing them to? Is there possibilities for re-traumatizing? And how do you process that? How do you create a safe space for them to make sense of that?
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to our speakers to begin responding to some of those difficult questions.
Lucky, with regard to your first question on capitalism, what I was mentioning there is that Augusto Boal, what Augusto Boal, he wanted to, he was going against the capitalist system. He wanted to make people aware of how capitalism is exploiting them. So through theater, people could become more aware of how they're being disadvantaged in terms of how they're being exploited, in terms of the salaries they're getting. With regard to Ngugi wa Thiong'o, that was the one example that I mentioned there. What he did was he set up a small little theater in an area where there was a factory, and he went to the people and he wanted to do the play in English, and they said, no, we don't want the play in English. We want the play in our vernacular, and we're going to write the play because we are experiencing this. And then they presented their performance on the issues that were affecting them in the factory. So they were also trying to show how they were being exploited. So with regard to the nexus between Marxism and capitalism, you know, whether we like it or not, you know, we're part of a capitalist society, but there are possibilities through the work that we do in theater and drama work that we can identify some of the issues as they manifested, and then we can contest those issues in terms of how do we work around those. Because now at the moment in the university, there are strikes. And that's also because the remuneration that people are receiving is not adequate for their survival. So through theater work then, we can try to examine how we try to support people who may be going through these having these various experiences. So what we're saying is drama and theater does not give you an answer. There are multiple perspectives of reality that emerge through the experiences of the participants. We don't say that that is the answer. It's like the same story with the decolonization story. There are multiple ways in which we are interpreting it. That's the one. With regard to trauma, that is a very important question. because trauma can come up at any moment, especially when you're thinking about the experiences that you may have had, anyone may have had. What I normally do, this procedure of theater of the oppressed and drama in education is from psychotherapy. It's used in psychotherapy for therapy to assist people who are experiencing particular challenges. I have experience, I did honors in psychology, I have experience in psychology. So when I work with the students or the participants, you have to have a de-stress moment. You have to process, you have to calm, you have to say, now everyone, let's just calm down. Let's relax. And we find a space quietly and we find ourselves. So very important question. So people who do not, who are dealing with difficult issues, like I'm thinking now about, the people in Palestine, and if we're doing some kind of work there with children, you obviously need to have a psychologist or a group of people who will be able to support that group. But very important question. Very, very, very important question. Okay.
Thank you, Logan. Lucky on the issue of charity. The groups that we construct is built up of mixed groups, students with different perspectives of a particular thing, students with different backgrounds, etc., etc. The example I use on breaking menstrual poverty, we had a group of students that brought in a lot of donations. And when they brought in donations, they thought it was good enough, and it was enough to not participate in taking the donations to the schools, meeting the learners that will be using it, see who the learners are, and. So the donation was good enough. For us, the project was, and there were also students in the group who felt that it was about the engagement. It's about learning about the students' needs, knowing about their needs, knowing about where they come from. And so we had a lot of tension, colleagues, a lot of drama happening there. We had to call in Dr. Darmans from the engagement office to help us unpack the roles that we need to play in terms of how we approach communities. It's not about us coming and dropping things. It's about what is the learning for us and our colleagues in the communities with whom it is that we are working. So we are working on this project over a period of 2 years. In the third year, we look at unpacking the pedagogy of the oppressed, and specifically in terms of what it looks like in the classrooms and in our schools, etc. So we are very mindful that our students must not see themselves as charity workers, but as agents of change, making a difference where they at, in collaboration with others. My people, I don't want to stand between myself and lunch.
Sorry, there was just one question that I needed to respond to with regard to Bruce's question.
You have 57 seconds.
Okay. Bruce, just to respond to your question, definitely without a shadow of a doubt, there's definitely a good link between the use of drama and theatre in education and community work. And the people who are involved can collectively write the script, and we could then implement forum theatre, where we change the entire script according to what the audience feel should be done. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone, for attending this session, and to our panelists for evoking a really, really interesting conversation that hopefully will continue over lunch. Just a little bit of housekeeping. There are 2 lines for lunch this today, so hopefully we'll get food a little bit quicker than yesterday. So one on this side and one on that side. The chairs that are in these venues will probably be moved. As you can see, there aren't that many chairs, but do not stress about that. The team will take care of that. Please go and enjoy your lunch. Thank you, everyone.